You're just a crippled old man playing dress-up, Coach Halloway sneered, grabbing the janitor's wrist. Take this rusted junk off, or I'll cut it off myself. Silas Vane didn't flinch. He just leaned on his mop, staring past the screaming man to the dark clouds swirling above the stadium. He didn't hear the insults. He heard the phantom rhythm of incoming choppers. Suddenly, the stadium lights flickered. A massive black shadow descended, the roar of rotors drowning out the band. A Black Hawk landed on the 50-yard line. A 4-star general stormed out, dropped to one knee before the janitor, and whispered, "We found you, sir. The Widowmaker is coming home." Where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments. If this journey of valor touched you, consider subscribing to Silent Veterans and help us give a voice to more incredible stories of our silent veterans. The smell of a high school locker room never changed. It was a thick biological cocktail of stale sweat, aerosol deodorant, and unchecked teenage testosterone. For 30 years, Silas Vane had inhaled that scent 5 nights a week, pushing a wide dust mop across the polished concrete of Cedar Point High. At 79, Silas moved with a mechanical, grinding slowness. His left leg, stiff from a fusion surgery the VA had botched in the 80s, dragged slightly with every step. Clack, scrape, clack, scrape. To the students, he was just Old Si, a fixture of the building no more sentient than the water fountains or the exit signs. They walked around him, talked through him, and dropped their candy wrappers at his feet, assuming the gray-haired man in the dark blue coveralls would simply absorb their mess. They were right. He always did. Silas paused near the varsity lockers, leaning heavily on the handle of his mop. His knuckles were swollen, arthritic knots, the skin paper-thin and spotted with age. He took a shallow breath, trying to steady the tremor in his hands. The humidity in the Ohio Valley was climbing tonight, pressing down on the roof of the gym like a wet blanket. It made his joints scream. It made the shrapnel buried deep in his hip burn with a low, radioactive heat. "Hey, you, Vane." The voice cracked like a whip across the echoing space. Silas didn't jump. He hadn't jumped at a loud noise since 1968. But he turned slowly, his eyes narrowing beneath bushy gray brows. Coach Brock Halloway stormed out of his office, a clipboard clutched in his hand like a weapon. Halloway was 38, a man who had peaked during his sophomore year of college ball and had been chasing that high ever since. He wore a tight polo shirt embroidered with the school mascot, his jaw set in a permanent expression of aggressive dissatisfaction. "I told you to have the floors buffed by 6, Halloway barked, closing the distance between them. He stopped inches from Silas's face, invading his personal space with the confidence of a man who had never been punched in the mouth. "The recruiters are coming tomorrow morning. The alumni board is coming. Do you know what it looks like when the floors are scuffed? It looks like we don't care about legacy." Silas looked down at the floor. It was spotless. "I finished the buffing an hour ago, Coach. These marks are fresh, cleats on the concrete." "Don't give me excuses, old man," Halloway snapped. "I don't pay you to make excuses. I pay you to make me look good." "The school board pays me," Silas said, his voice a gravelly rumble that sounded like tires on a dirt road. It was a soft voice, one that rarely rose above a whisper. Silence had been his best friend for a long time. Halloway's face turned a shade of crimson that matched the locker doors. He hated it when Silas spoke. He hated the lack of fear in the old man's eyes. Most of the staff scurried when Halloway yelled, terrified of his temper. But Silas Vane just stood there, blinking slowly, looking at the coach with a detached, almost pitying expression. "You think you're smart?" Halloway hissed, poking a finger into Silas's chest. The impact was light, but the disrespect was heavy enough to crush bone. "You think because you've been here since the dawn of time you can slack off? You're a liability, Vane. You're slow. You smell like camphor and old soup. And you're scaring the donors." Silas shifted his weight, alleviating the pressure on his bad leg. "I'll run the buffer again, Coach. No need to shout." "I'll shout if I want to," Halloway roared, his voice bouncing off the metal lockers. "I am building a championship team here. I am molding men. I need excellence in this building, not whatever this is." Halloway's eyes dropped to Silas's wrist. There, peeking out from the cuff of his stained blue work shirt, was a band of dull, battered copper. It was a bracelet, bent out of shape, the metal worn smooth by decades of friction against skin. "And that," Halloway sneered, grabbing Silas's wrist and holding it up. "What is this trash?" "I told you last week, no jewelry. It's a safety violation." Silas stiffened. His muscles, usually slack with age, corded instantly. He pulled his arm back, not violently, but with a firmness that surprised the younger man. "It stays on." "It's an eyesore," Halloway spat. "What is it? Some lucky charm from a hippie commune? You wear it like it's gold, but it looks like scrap metal you pulled out of a drain." "It's for a friend," Silas said. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that dropped the temperature in the room. "A brother?" Halloway laughed, a sharp, barking sound devoid of humor. "A brother, please. You probably bought it at a pawn shop to get some sympathy. I know your type. Vane. You limp around here acting like the world owes you something because you're old. You want respect. You earn it. You don't get it by mopping floors and wearing costume jewelry." The coach stepped back, adjusting his polo shirt, sneering with disgust. "And take it off or don't come back tomorrow, I'm serious. I want a professional look for the walkthrough. If I see that piece of junk on your wrist when the general arrives, I will personally cut it off and fire you on the spot. Do you understand me?" Silas didn't answer. He couldn't. The blood was thumping in his ears, a rhythmic whoosh 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 that drowned out the hum of the vending machines. "I said, do you understand me?" Halloway yelled, turning to leave. "Clean this mess up, and fix your uniform. You look like a disgrace." The office door slammed shut, leaving Silas alone in the vast, sterile silence of the locker room. The humiliation didn't sting like a slap. It burned like acid. It wasn't the insults about his job. Silas took pride in his work, no matter how small. It was the hand on the wrist. It was the dismissal of the copper band. Slowly, with a trembling hand, Silas reached across and covered the bracelet with his right palm. The metal was cold against his skin, battered and imperfect. He ran his thumb over the engraving that had long since been rubbed almost invisible by worry and time. CPL. T. Miller. USMC. 1968. MIA. He closed his eyes. He wasn't in the locker room anymore. The smell of bleach and floor wax evaporated instantly and heavy, tasting of copper and wet rot. The silence of the school was ripped apart. Thump, 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 thump. The sound started in the back of his skull, the rhythm of the rotors. Silas's thumb pressed harder into the copper bracelet. The totem was the key, and the lock was turning. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered and died, replaced by the blinding white flash of a magnesium flare cutting through the darkness of the K.I.A. Valley. The floor beneath his feet wasn't concrete anymore. It was mud, deep, sucking, blood-soaked mud. He was 24 again, and he was terrified. The jungle didn't breathe. It suffocated. The transition was instant and violent. One moment Silas was standing on the sanitized tile of a high school locker room, and the next, he was submerged in the green hell of the K.I.A. Valley, 3 clicks east of the Laotian border. It was 200 hours, November 14th, 1968. The air was a solid wall of humidity, thick enough to chew. It smelled of rotting vegetation, ozone, and the metallic tang of fear. The darkness was absolute, a heavy black curtain that pressed against the eyes, broken only by the bioluminescent glow of decay on the jungle floor and the occasional, terrifying flicker of distant lightning. Silas Vane, Sergeant Vane then, though the men of Recon team, Havoc, just called him Widowmaker, lay flat on his belly in the mud. The mud here wasn't like the dirt in Ohio. It was a living thing, a parasitic slurry of red clay and leech-infested water that sucked at your boots and worked its way into every pore of your skin. It was cold, cloying, and smelled of the latrine. "Sarge," a voice hissed from the darkness to his left. It was barely a breath, a vibration in the air rather than a sound. Silas didn't turn his head. He kept his eyes locked on the tree line ahead, scanning the dense foliage through the rain-streaked lens of his starlight scope. "Stow it, Bishop," he whispered back. Private Raymond Bishop was 19 years old, fresh from Paris Island, with a face that hadn't seen a razor in 3 days and eyes that were wide with the kind of terror that gets men killed. He was the radio man, RTO, and the 25-pound PRC-77 radio strapped to his back made him a priority target for every sniper in the North Vietnamese army. "I hear them, Sarge," Bishop whimpered, his voice trembling. "They're all around us. I can hear the bamboo snapping." "It's the wind, Ray," whispered another voice from the right. This one was steady, calm, laced with a southern drawl that sounded like home. Corporal Thomas Miller. Miller was the team's moral compass. A kid from Georgia who carried a Bible in his breast pocket and a picture of his fiancée, Sarah, taped to the stock of his M16. He was the one who had given Silas the Zippo lighter weeks ago, a joke about Silas smoking too much. "You keep the fire, boss. I'll keep the faith." Silas shifted his weight, the mud squelching softly beneath his chest. He knew Bishop was right. It wasn't the wind. The jungle had gone quiet. The insects had stopped their shrieking. The monkeys had ceased their chatter. That was the tell. The predator was near. "Check your sectors," Silas ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. He was the Widowmaker. He didn't get scared. He got to work. "Miller, watch the flank." "Bishop, get me an updated sit rep from the bird. Tell them we're heavy." "Heavy?" "Sarge, we're a 6-man recon team." Bishop whispered frantically. "We ain't heavy. We are about to be," Silas muttered. A twig snapped, not the wet, bending sound of wind, but the dry crack of a boot on dead wood. Then, the world exploded. It started with a thump, a hollow sound like a cork popping from a bottle. A green flare shot up into the canopy, bathing the clearing in a sickly, spectral light. The shadows elongated and danced, transforming the trees into skeletal fingers. "Contact! Front!" Miller screamed, his calm drawl shattering into a roar. The tree line erupted. It wasn't just a patrol. It was a regiment. The muzzle flashes sparkled like a string of firecrackers, a continuous strobe light of death. The air above Silas's head snapped and hissed as hundreds of 7.62mm rounds shredded the vegetation. Leaves, bark, and dirt rained down on them. "Returns fire. Give them some hate," Silas yelled, pulling the trigger of his Car-15. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, spitting brass into the mud. He saw silhouettes moving in the green light. Dozens of them, then hundreds. They were swarming down the slope like army ants. A human wave of khaki uniforms and pith helmets. They were shouting, a guttural war cry that drowned out the mechanical rattle of the AK-47s. "They're flanking left," Miller shouted, his machine gun chugging rhythmically. "Sarge, we're overrun. There's too many of them." Silas rolled onto his back to reload, mud splashing into his mouth. He spat it out, tasting copper. He looked at Bishop. The kid was curled into a ball behind a rotting log, clutching the handset of the radio, screaming into the static. "Broken arrow. Broken arrow. This is Havoc 1-6. We are besieged. Coordinates follows." Bishop was crying, tears cutting tracks through the camouflage paint on his face. "Get up, Bishop." Silas crawled over to him, grabbing the young private by the harness and dragging him upright. "You die here if you stay here. Move your ass to the extraction point." "I can't. My legs won't move," Bishop sobbed. Silas slapped him. It was a hard, sharp crack across the face that stunned the kid into silence. "You move or I shoot you myself. You're a Marine. Act like it. Move." Bishop nodded, eyes wide, and scrambled backward, crab walking through the slime. "Miller, fall back," Silas commanded, firing a burst into the darkness to cover them. "Pop smoke on the LZ. I'm with you, boss," Miller yelled. He stood up, swinging his M60 machine gun around to suppress the flanking maneuver. It happened in slow motion. That was the cruel trick of combat memory. The worst moments were always rendered in high definition, frame by agonizing frame. A rocket-propelled grenade, an RPG, whistled out of the bamboo. It looked like a streak of angry red lightning. It hit the tree directly above Miller's head. The explosion was a concussive hammer blow that knocked the wind out of Silas. Shrapnel and wood splinters sprayed the clearing like shotgun pellets. "Miller!" Silas screamed. The smoke cleared for a second. Miller was on the ground. His legs were a ruin of blood and bone, shredded by the blast. He was trying to crawl, dragging himself by his elbows, his face a mask of shock. The M60 lay bent and useless a few feet away. Silas scrambled toward him, ignoring the bullets kicking up geysers of mud around his head. He grabbed Miller's flak jacket. "I got you, Tom. I got you." Silas grunted, heaving with everything he had. Miller looked up at him. His eyes were glassy, fading. He coughed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Go, Sarge." "Sarah." "Shut up. You're going home to Sarah," Silas roared, pulling him. But the mud was too deep, and the enemy was too close. He could see their faces now. NVA soldiers, not 20 yards away, fixing bayonets. "Bishop, is that bird inbound?" Silas yelled over his shoulder.
"They're coming in
2 minutes
hot."
out, Bishop screamed from the edge of the clearing. 2 minutes. It might as well have been 2 centuries. Silas looked at Miller, then at Bishop, then at the wall of enemy soldiers closing in. He did the math. The math was simple, and the math was cruel. They couldn't carry Miller and outrun the enemy. If they tried, they would all die. If they stayed, they would all die. There was only one variable that changed the equation. Silas stopped pulling. He looked down at Miller. Miller knew. The kid smiled, a bloody, heartbreaking expression of acceptance. He reached into his pocket with a shaking hand and pulled out something metallic. The copper bracelet he had been working on, tapping it out from a spent artillery shell casing. He pressed it into Silas's hand. "Tell her," Miller whispered. "I'll tell her," Silas choked out. Silas stood up. He grabbed Miller's bandolier of grenades. He turned to Bishop, who was watching from the tree line, paralyzed by the horror of the choice being made. "Bishop, get to the chopper." Silas's voice was a thunderclap that cut through the noise of battle. "That is a direct order. Go." "Sarge, no!" Bishop screamed, reaching out. "Go!" Silas turned his back on his safety. He turned his back on the extraction. He faced the oncoming wave of death. He wasn't Silas Vane the janitor. He was the Wraith. He was the Widowmaker. He pulled the pins on 2 grenades, holding the spoons down, and began to run. Not away from the enemy, but toward them. He charged straight into the center of the ambush, firing his rifle one-handed, screaming a primal sound that was half prayer, half curse. He needed to draw their fire. He needed to make them look at him so the rescue chopper could land for Bishop. He saw the NVA soldiers hesitate, confused by the lone madman sprinting into their kill zone. That hesitation was all he needed. Thwup, thwup, thwup. The roar of the Huey gunship crested the ridge behind him. The door gunners opened up, miniguns purring like chainsaws, chewing up the jungle on either side of Silas. Silas dove behind a fallen log just as a mortar round landed next to him. The world turned white. The heat was instantaneous. He felt himself being lifted, thrown like a rag doll. His left leg twisted at an impossible angle, snapping with a sickening crunch that vibrated up his spine. He hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs. Darkness swirled at the edges of his vision. He couldn't hear the shooting anymore. He could only hear a high-pitched ringing. He tried to move, but his lower body was pinned. He looked up. Through the smoke and the rain, he saw the Huey lifting off. He saw a figure hanging out of the open door. Bishop reaching down, screaming silently, his hand grasping at empty air. Silas lay back in the mud. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold numbness. The enemy was swarming over his position. He tightened his grip on the copper bracelet in his left hand and the grenade in his right. He waited for them to get closer. He waited until he could smell their sweat. "I'm sorry, Tom," he thought as the first enemy soldier loomed over him, bayonet raised. Silas released the spoon on the grenade. The jungle consumed him. "Are you deaf, old man? I said get out of my sight." The scream brought Silas back to the present with a violent jolt. The green hell of the Ashau Valley dissolved, replaced once again by the harsh fluorescent glare of the locker room. The smell of cordite faded, overtaken by the scent of industrial floor wax. Silas blinked, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. For a split second, he looked at Coach Halloway and didn't see a football coach. He saw an enemy combatant. His hand twitched, instinctively reaching for a sidearm that hadn't been at his hip for 50 years. He forced himself to exhale. He forced his hand to relax. He was just a janitor. This was just a high school. "I'm going to coach," Silas rasped, his voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. He turned his back on Halloway, dragging his mop bucket toward the service exit that led out to the football field. "And take that trash off your wrist," Halloway yelled after him. "If I see it tomorrow, you're done." Silas pushed through the double doors and stepped out into the humid night air. The stadium lights were already on for the team's walkthrough, bathing the artificial turf in a brilliant, artificial daylight. He limped along the sideline, intending to disappear into the maintenance shed behind the bleachers. He just wanted to sit down. He just wanted the shaking in his hands to stop. Then, the ground began to tremble. It wasn't the subtle vibration of a passing truck. It was a deep, resonant shaking that rattled the aluminum bleachers and caused the water bottles on the benches to dance. Halloway burst out of the locker room behind him, looking up at the sky. "What the hell? Is that thunder?" I told the AD to check the radar. But there were no clouds. The sound grew louder, transforming from a rumble into a rhythmic, chopping roar that Silas felt in the marrow of his fused bones. Thump, 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 thump. It was the heartbeat of the war, returning to claim him. From the south, a dark shape crested the roof of the gymnasium. It was massive, sleek, and black as oil. A UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, devoid of markings except for the faint gray lettering of the United States Marine Corps. It banked aggressively, the wash from its rotors kicking up a cyclone of rubber pellets and dust from the field. "Hey! Hey!" Halloway screamed, running onto the field, waving his clipboard frantically. "You can't land that here. This is a fresh turf. Get off my field." The pilot ignored the screaming man. The helicopter flared, hovering for a moment above the 50-yard line, directly over the painted mascot, before settling down with a heavy, mechanical groan. The wind from the blades flattened the grass and nearly knocked Halloway off his feet. He had to shield his eyes, stumbling back, his polo shirt whipping violently around his torso. Silas didn't move. He stood by the maintenance shed, leaning on his mop, watching the metal beast settle. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The rotors began to slow, their whine dropping in pitch. The side door of the Black Hawk slid open. Two Marines in dress blues stepped out first, their movements crisp and synchronized. They took positions at the base of the steps, standing at rigid attention. Then, a third figure emerged. He was an older man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the olive-drab service uniform of a 4-star general. His chest was a colorful wall of ribbons that told a story of 5 decades of service. His face was weathered, carved from granite, with eyes that had seen the same ghosts Silas saw every night. It was General Raymond Bishop, Commandant of the Marine Corps. Halloway's anger instantly morphed into a sycophantic grin. He straightened his collar, smoothed his hair, and puffed out his chest. He turned to his assistant coaches, who had spilled out of the locker room. "It's a recruitment stunt," Halloway shouted over the dying engine noise. "They sent the brass for the state semifinals. I told you I had pull. Look sharp, boys." Halloway jogged toward the helicopter, extending his hand as the general stepped onto the turf. "Hi, General," Halloway shouted, putting on his best charming coach voice. "Welcome to Cedar Point. I'm head coach Brock Halloway. It is an honor to have you here to speak to my—" General Bishop didn't even blink. He walked straight through Halloway. He didn't sidestep, he didn't pause. He simply marched forward with the momentum of a freight train, his shoulder colliding with Halloway's chest hard enough to spin the younger man around and send him stumbling into the grass. "Hey," Halloway sputtered, shocked. "Watch it." Bishop didn't hear him. His eyes were locked on a target 50 yards away. He was staring at the sideline. He was staring at the maintenance shed. He was staring at the janitor. The stadium went silent. The players, who had stopped their warm-ups, watched in confusion. The school board members were frozen near the concession stand. Halloway stood in the middle of the field, mouth agape, looking from the general to the old man in the stained coveralls. General Bishop marched across the field. His gait was purposeful, military, But as he got closer to the sideline, his stride hitched slightly. The mask of command began to crack. Silas straightened up. He let go of the mop handle. It clattered to the concrete track, a loud noise in the sudden quiet. Bishop stopped 3 feet in front of him. Up close, the general looked tired. He looked like the 19-year-old kid who had cried in the mud of the K.I.A. Valley. Bishop's eyes dropped to Silas's left hand. He saw the copper band, the bent, tarnished bracelet made from an artillery shell. The general's lower lip trembled. He took a breath that shuddered in his chest. "They told me you died, Sarge," Bishop whispered. His voice was thick, wet with tears he had been holding back for 50 years. "The report said K.I.A. body not recovered. I left you there. You followed orders, Ray," Silas said softly. His voice was the same gravelly rumble, but it was gentle now. "You got on the bird. That was the mission." "I never stopped looking," Bishop said, tears now spilling freely down his cheeks, ignoring the hundreds of people watching. "I checked every list, every POW manifest. I spent my whole career looking for the Wraith." "I'm not a Wraith," Silas said, a small sad smile touching his lips. "Just a janitor." "No." Bishop shook his head violently. "No, you are not." Slowly, with the immense weight of reverence, the 4-star general took a step back. He snapped his heels together. He raised his right hand, fingers knife straight, to the brim of his cover. He held the salute. It wasn't a quick gesture. It was a statue of respect. It was an acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid. Silas hesitated. His bad leg throbbed. He looked down at his dirty coveralls, then at the pristine uniform of the man he had saved. Slowly, instinct taking over, Silas straightened his spine. The pain vanished. He brought his twisted, arthritic hand up to his brow. He returned the salute. "General," Silas said. "Sergeant Major," Bishop corrected him, his voice booming across the silent field so everyone, Halloway included, could hear. "I am here to correct a clerical error, and to bring you home." Bishop reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a velvet box. He didn't wait for a ceremony. He didn't wait for the politicians. He opened it right there on the sideline. Inside, resting on black silk, was a gold star suspended from a blue ribbon. The Medal of Honor. This belongs to you," Bishop said, his voice cracking. "For conspicuous gallantry, for saving my life, and for the brotherhood you never broke." Behind them, Coach Halloway watched, his face draining of color, the clipboard slipping from his numb fingers and hitting the turf with a dull thud. He looked at the bum he had tried to fire, and for the first time in his life, he understood how small he really was. Escritor de Historias Emocionantes Custom Gem. Chapter 4. Legacy and Closing. The silence that followed. General Bishop's declaration was heavier than the helicopter that sat idling at midfield. It was a silence born of sudden, crushing realization. Coach Brock Halloway stood rooted to the spot, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. The arrogance that usually radiated from him, the swagger, the shouting, the demands for excellence, had evaporated. In its place was a cold, hollow pit of shame. He looked at the Medal of Honor resting in the velvet box, the gold star catching the stadium lights, and then he looked at the man he had threatened to fire for wearing costume jewelry. Silas didn't reach for the medal. He stared at it, his eyes glistening. "Ray, I can't take that. I didn't do anything special. I just didn't want you to die. That is exactly why you take it," Bishop said firmly, closing Silas's trembling fingers around the box. "You held the line, Silas. You bought us time with your blood. You traded your life for ours. That isn't special. That is the definition of valor." Bishop turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the stunned football team, the gaping cheerleaders, and finally landing on Halloway. The general's expression hardened. He walked over to the coach, his boots crunching on the turf. "You," Bishop said. It wasn't a shout, but the command in his voice made Halloway flinch. "You're the one in charge of these boys?" Yes, sir," Halloway stammered, his voice an octave higher than usual. "Coach Halloway, we focus on winning here, General. Winning. Bishop repeated, tasting the word like it was sour milk. He gestured toward Silas, who was now wiping his eyes with the back of his dirty sleeve. You told my sergeant major that he was a liability. You told him he didn't understand legacy. Let me explain something to you, son. Bishop stepped closer, invading Halloway's personal space just as the coach had done to Silas earlier. Winning a game is a statistic, Bishop said, his voice carrying to the stands. What that man did is history. You teach these boys how to run a ball. Silas Vane taught me how to stand when the world is burning. He taught me that loyalty isn't a word on a jersey. It's staying behind in the mud so your brothers can go home. The general pointed to the copper bracelet on Silas's wrist, the one Halloway had called trash. That bracelet isn't jewelry. It's a promise, Bishop said. It's the name of the man who died so Silas could live, and Silas has worn it every day for 50 years to keep his memory alive. That is honor. That is heritage. And frankly, Coach, you aren't fit to carry his mop bucket. Halloway looked down at his clipboard, his face burning. He couldn't meet the general's eyes. He couldn't look at his players, who were now watching him with a different kind of scrutiny. The illusion of his authority had shattered. Bishop turned back to the team. Attention. The command was instinctive. The football players, confused but awed, straightened up. This man, Bishop pointed to Silas, is a decorated war hero. He is a silent veteran. He walked through hell so you could play a game under these lights in freedom. From this day forward, when he walks down this hallway, you don't look through him. You look at him, and you show him the respect he paid for with his own body. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir, the team shouted, a ragged but genuine chorus. Bishop walked back to Silas and placed a hand on his shoulder. Come on, Silas. The bird is fueled. I've got a dinner reserved at the Pentagon. There are a lot of people who want to shake the Widowmaker's hand. Silas looked at the helicopter, then at the general. For a moment, the temptation was there. To leave the mop, the bleach, and the disrespect behind, to fly away into the glory he deserved. But Silas Vane shook his head. I can't, Ray, Silas said softly. Bishop frowned. What? Why? I didn't finish the locker room, Silas said, gesturing to the open door with his thumb. And the floors need buffing before the game tomorrow. If I leave now, the boys won't have a clean place to get ready. Bishop stared at him for a long moment. Then the general laughed. It was a warm, booming sound. You stubborn old mule, you haven't changed a bit. Mission first. Mission first, Silas agreed. All right, Bishop nodded. Then we'll wait. But I'm not leaving until I get that handshake. You already gave me one, Silas said, looking at the metal box. Then I'll see you at 600 for coffee, Bishop said. And Silas, if anyone gives you trouble, he glanced at Halloway. You have the direct line to the Joint Chiefs. I'll be fine, Ray, Silas said. The general saluted one last time, turned, and marched back to the Black Hawk. The rotors spun up, whipping the air into a frenzy, as the helicopter lifted off, banking into the night sky. Silas stood alone on the sideline. He wasn't hunched over anymore. He stood tall, his weight evenly distributed, the pain in his leg forgotten. He picked up his mop bucket. He turned to walk back toward the school. Mr. Vane? Silas paused. It was the quarterback, a senior named Jason. Behind him, the entire varsity team had formed a line. They weren't blocking his path. They were forming an honor guard. Let me get that for you, sir, Jason said, reaching out and taking the heavy bucket from Silas's hand. I can manage, son, Silas said. No, sir, Jason said firmly. You've done enough carrying. We got it from here. Coach Halloway stood alone near the 50-yard line, watching as his team walked the old janitor back to the building, opening the doors for him, asking him about the medal, asking him about the bracelet. Silas Vane walked into the school, not as a ghost but as a legend. The truth was out. The silence was broken. And as the locker room door swung shut, the copper bracelet on his wrist caught the light, shining like a beacon of hope in the darkness. He was home. If you were moved by Silas Vane's story of quiet courage, please like this video. Share it with someone who respects our veterans, and subscribe to Silent Veterans for more stories of the unassuming heroes who walk among us.